Today we're going to be speaking about, well, after the whole kind of COVID-19 situation just kind of shakes the world, want to kind of explore how it's impacted the music industry and kind of live gigs more so, and then we'll move on to the fact of how record companies and streaming websites a bit later on. But here I have Richie with me, and so Richie, do you just want to kind of explain what you are and what you do?
Okay, hello, I'm Richie and I'm a sound engineer. I mostly work in live at the moment. I work for a company based in Fareham. We do little festivals and gigs around the south, although we were in Birmingham the other week, where I build stages and PAs and do live sound for the bands. The guys that I work for are also a jazz trio, so I do the live sound for them when they're playing gigs as well. As well as that, I record and mix.
Yeah, so what kind of music do you kind of record and mix on?
Well, at the moment, working with these guys, their whole kind of stance on everything is there's no point in just doing anything because you probably won't learn anything. So they don't want to work with people just because they're paying. They'd rather work for less money with good bands, if that makes sense.
Nice.
It sounds really stupid, it sounds really unbusinesslike, but because the bulk of their money is made from being a jazz band, they don't need to be so open to everything in everything else they do. So they try to work with artists who are a bit more serious about it and well-rehearsed and talented. So I'm trying to adopt that mentality. Coming off the back of uni, my kind of idea of what I wanted to do was to be a studio engineer, recording and mixing. But now I'm adopting that way of thinking and trying to sort of what's the word?
Multifacet?
Yeah, a little bit. What's the other word? Diversify.
Oh, right, yeah.
Yeah. Because then you can sort of guarantee income and carry on working with people that you actually want to be working with. So I'm going to be working with a band from Bournemouth who are sort of like a country rock band. Some of it's country, some of it's bluesy, some of it's rocky. So they're quite a mix. But they're not sort of like, oh, you know, when we get signed and get loads of money, you get pissed and all that. They're sort of like, let's just put a record together, spend 6 months to a year doing it and just come up with something great. But obviously with coronavirus, that's put a hold on everything, including all the live work over the summer and all of the recording that I was going to do with them.
Yeah. So could you kind of delve in a bit more to how the coronavirus has impacted you specifically? So with work that you're going to do with them, is there anything else that's impacted with you regarding with your work?
I mean, the company they're in a position where they can carry on doing stuff and paying me for a while because I'm salaried, which is good. So if everything sort of returns to normal in the next 6 months, then the company shouldn't go under, we should be fine. But all of my work at all the festivals and things like that over the summer has been cancelled, for the foreseeable at least. Some of them might, if things level out in the next couple of months, they might sort of reschedule or something like that. But right now they've all just said no, it's cancelled.
You're quite lucky with that aspect because a heavy majority of the people that work in the music industry are basically just done freelance, aren't they? Or self-employed, So they've not got that guarantee the same way that you have.
No, I've come out quite lucky, but a lot of speaking for live, obviously festivals are either being moved or cancelled. A couple of guys I know, one of them's Liam Gallagher's monitor engineer, he said that all of their work's cancelled. Generally, they don't want to move stuff because it might actually end up costing them more money. If they move something to September, October and they're still in lockdown or still have social distancing measures, then they've lost more money. So all of it's kind of about risk and the fact that we don't actually know how this is all going to pan out.
From the outside perspective, the most transparent impact I can see of happening on the music industry is the cancellations of festivals and gigs. We've seen from what I've read, over 300 festivals have either been cancelled or postponed. These include obviously Glasgow, Download, Coachella, and like you were saying, a lot of companies are trying to either delay it, or announce it very late if they're going to delay or postpone it because it's going to cost a lot of money. From what I've found, that Glastonbury could experience losses of over 100 million, which is absolutely bonkers.
Yeah.
And to kind of quantify that loss is actually quite big in the music industry. But how many? But it's not just that, is it? There's so many more people that are so connected to festivals and gigs. Did you kind of try and paint us a picture of like the amount of people that work at festivals that this is going to damage?
Yeah. When I worked at Glastonbury, I was told, I'm not sure how accurate this is, but off the top of my head, it was like 1/3 of the amount of people there were actually working on the festival at some point. So when I got there, all of the fields were sort of laid out, everything was fenced off, and then you had scaffolders in building, the infrastructure of all the stages, chippies in, creating all the fronts, painters in, painting all the fronts and all that. So everything you see needs to be done by some sort of building tradesperson. As well as that, you've got all of the food stands, you've got people going around collecting rubbish, you've got the supply of power is a massive one as well. There's huge jennies everywhere, so you have on-site electricians making sure that everything's still running. You've got the police, you've got ambulance crews, and St. John's, people like that. So the actual percentage of people involved with music is minuscule against everybody else that's there. So obviously this has a massive impact on all of those people. So if they've already sort of allotted time for doing these builds, because most of it would probably be underway now, certainly for like Glastonbury, because it's huge, but for the other festivals, if they can't replace that work with something else, then they're going to be out of pocket. As well as that, if it gets postponed and then gets cancelled again, they've kind of been hit by that same trap twice, if that makes sense. So there's, it impacts a hell of a lot of people. As well as, the punters that are missing out, and, will they get refunds, will they not? That's always a worry when you're a punter and something gets cancelled.
Right, so within speaking about festivals that have been going to be quietly affected by this, some of them have been cancelled, some of them are going to see a lot kind of money, don't know whether they're going to get it from the insurances, and whether they're going to have to delay the festivals to the next year, and the wider aspects that's going to be affected by that in so many different types of people that work on festivals. How is this really going to affect smaller festivals, as they've been bringing less money in recent years because of the high performance fees from artists, which has been a result of streaming and less album sales, and resulting in more difficult cash flows for them? Is it likely that we're going to see a lot of small festivals go under?
Yeah, possibly. It depends on... Obviously, the issue with insurance is the same for any festival in terms of whether they've got cover for communicable disease, which most festivals probably don't. And the only ones that tend to are the ones that have animals involved, like petting zoos and things like that. Generally, nobody expected this sort of thing to break out, and it's not even that it's broken out in a festival and everybody's got sick and had to go home or anything like that. It's the fact that it's stopping the festivals from progressing, and obviously you can't retrospectively get cover for something while it's happening. Same way you can retrospectively get insurance on your house for fire when it's on fire.
Yeah.
So there's that to the paying out. Obviously, if they've already got cash flowing in terms of people they've either set not a retainer, but like a deposit down on for building works and things like that, then they could possibly lose money that way, depending on how far down the line we are. So obviously it depends on the festival, it depends on how much money they've got in the bank and how much money they've committed themselves to already. So if they're not getting anything back from cancellations, then, and they've already, like I said, just put down deposits. If it's at the point where nothing's gone ahead, nothing's been paid out for, then they haven't actually lost anything potentially yet, apart from the opportunity to make money.
Yeah. I guess we see with a lot of companies as well that have obviously some have continued to pay their suppliers, some haven't. So I imagine we get that with a lot of festivals as well. But obviously, because it's so focused in one part of the year and all the money comes from one short burst, I guess that might be a bit harder to do. And I guess it's also very unlikely that any kind of festival just holds cash reserves for any kind of reason. So yeah, it's like I can't imagine it's going to be easy for anyone to kind of dip into to any cash flows or get cash to keep surviving. I guess maybe the only one I could imagine are the big festivals with the likes of Glastonbury and the one in Scotland. I can't remember which one it is, but they hold money aside and they have a year off, don't they, to let the land grow back properly.
Yeah, what's the name of that? There's a name for that year, isn't there? It's every third year, I think.
Yeah, I can't remember what it's called now, but it's. I know Glastonbury just recently had one, didn't they? So,
they've said that this year will go ahead at some point because it's their 50th anniversary, and also I think Oasis are getting back together. Like they've been sort of
for the last 20 years,
for a few months. Say again.
Like they have been for the last 20 years.
Yeah, but they've come out and said that they might be doing a charity gig, haven't they, to raise money for coronavirus.
Yeah, I think Liam Gallagher said that, and I still think it's unlikely that Noel will come in. It might just be the rest of them, the original, well, 3 of the original 4 will come together and they'll get someone else to do Noel's bit.
So it'll be crap then.
Yeah, pretty much. Well, they did would you remember after the Manchester bombings, and they did that gig at the Emirates Cricket Arena, and he still wasn't there as well.
No, I didn't know.
So...
Yeah. It's not worth seeing then, is it?
Yeah, not really, to be fair. You can see Liam Gallagher on his own anyways, and he'll chuck in a few Oasis songs there. But yeah, kind of going back to the thing, so we spoke about festivals already now, and obviously festivals are kind of a big behemoth in the music industry. They obviously operate purely in the summer. However, with gigs, they operate kind of more all year round. Does the same thing kind of apply to gigs compared to festivals? And I've recently had a gig that I was supposed to see in the next couple of weeks. I was supposed to see Circwaves. That's been moved. Is it more manageable to manage these gigs, or is it compared to festivals, or is it just a bit... Is it likely that we're going to see a lot of these cancelled as well? The kind of nature of the argument I'm talking about is because gigs are probably traditionally a bit more smaller and they're more tied to an indoor venue. Are they a bit more managed in this crisis? Sorry, a bit more easy to manage in this crisis?
There's so many factors that play into that. That are things that, as a punter, you wouldn't necessarily think about. So the first thing is scheduling, which is can they get the venues when they want? You know, how far down the road will it be until they can actually get booked back in again? The other thing is if it's kind of national gigs, it's not so bad. If it's international gigs, that complicates things immensely because of the amount of visas that you have to get for everybody who's involved. All of the hotel bookings, all of the transports in each country and things like that. All the flights, the international flights and things like that. So it's a lot easier if it's just within, if it's an English band touring England, it's not so bad. But if it's an international tour, then that creates a lot more complication. So there's the potential for it, but I think given the uncertainty of the situation we're in, I mean, we don't know if we're going to be on lockdown for, another, or whether the lockdown's going to get worse for one. It may be a total shutdown, or whether it's going to lighten in the next couple of months, or whether we're going to see a whole year of this. So I think to avoid any more loss of money, you'll probably see more cancellations than you will see movements of dates.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it sounds like I'm quite lucky with my gig then.
Yeah, definitely.
So one thing that's quite interesting about that is we were talking about gigs being moved and the whole complications behind that. What happens if, let's say, someone who's let's say a sound engineer is supposed to be recording a gig for example, the Red Hot Chili Peppers in June, but that gets pushed down to September, but they're already recording a gig for the 1975 in round about that same time, or round a tour at the same time, what happens between then? What happens with the sound engineer? What do they have to choose, or how does contract issues work?
Well, it's a good question, actually. I mean, if they're contractually obligated to fulfill something that's already pre-planned, then they'll have to go ahead and do that. I mean, if they've... Generally, I think what would happen in that instance is the Red Hot Chili Peppers would get a different engineer. And there's plenty for them to go through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
there's a lot of engineers out there that they can just quickly sort of get on board with. If I were the engineer, I'd drop the 1975 Chili's any day.
Yeah, yeah. I think everyone would.
Say
I think everyone would. For some reason, they were the first two acts that came across into my head. I don't know why the 1975 were there, but.
Yeah, I think that you've got a huge amount. It's highly competitive in the music industry. So people would jump at the opportunity of getting on board with the bands like the Red Hot Chili Peppers. Furthermore on that though, it's kind of you wind up with a lot of engineers who are really sort of worth the salt working for less because of the amount of people that are trying to sort of go at these big jobs, and then you sort of wind up with people who aren't as good getting paid more money, if that makes sense, getting themselves into positions that they shouldn't necessarily be in.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That happens quite often, especially if something's rushed. Like a tour's getting moved, and things that were done a year in advance. Because normally all this is done about a year in advance.
Yeah.
Or even longer. The company I work for are booking next summer's stuff in the year before, around sort of January, February time.
Right.
Or in December. So not for the oncoming summer, the following summer.
Right. Wow, that's a lot of planning ahead.
That's... Yeah, and you've got to, because obviously nearer the summer, everything gets booked up already, and you've got to be ahead of the game. So I think quality could potentially be affected, but there are so many good engineers out there anyway that it shouldn't necessarily be a problem.
Yeah. How was this COVID-19 then impacting record labels?
Well, actually, funny enough, a friend of mine shared something from a musician on Facebook the other day, and he was going to release his album in August, but he's moving it up.
Right.
So I think right now, what's interesting is a couple of guys that I know that are mix engineers, they're still working, because I think it's quite a long process getting an album recorded or produced, would be the sort of modern day equivalent of recording an album, if you see what I mean. Because a lot of it's just done on a computer, and then there might be a few real instruments that are added, and people come in and sing over it, and then quite often that's sent off to a professional mix engineer that will mix it. Then it'll go off to a mastering house to get mastered for all of the mediums that it's going to be reproduced on.
Yeah.
So those guys are still working. I think there's probably going to be enough stuff to last a while, and then what will happen is when we get back to normal, when the lockdown goes, the kind of mingling of bands with engineers in studios will start happening again, and more work will be produced. Especially in this time, it's quite a creative period. If musicians are locked in their house, they have no choice but to do what they do best. So I think it's quite a good time for people to get creative. Yeah,
it is. I think it's been shared by quite a lot of people. You see people, in different aspects. You see people doing. I don't know if you've seen that big marble thing where this guy's just essentially created a course and runs a lot of marbles down it. You see a lot of people just doing ridiculous videos on social media. So I think a lot of people are trying to be creative with the boredom that they have.
You see the one of the guy throwing stuff out of his window? It's literally just like a few seconds long. He's like throws marble out of his window and just throws a marble out of his window and films it. Throws bouncy ball out of his window. It's just really dumb.
One good point that you made was the aspect of your friend who was pushing his album forward. We've already seen quite a few big artists release their albums in obviously so we've seen The Weeknd release an album, we've seen Dua Lipa release an album. It seems like it'd be a very good idea for a lot of artists if they've got the album ready to just essentially try and push it to be released now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think right now people need to be entertained more than ever. But I think people are probably watching more stuff than they are listening.
Yeah, well, this yeah, that was quite an interesting thing that I heard. I read a stat that essentially in Italy, which is obviously one of the countries that is most affected by this, that the streaming has actually declined, which is quite interesting to think. But from when you look at it initially, but when you think about it a bit more in depth, it kind of makes more sense of our generation and how we listen to music, because a lot of people not many people sit down and listen to an album, and like you said, a lot more people are sitting down and actually, when they do, just watch things instead.
It's massively changed,
and I'm the same. I listen to music on the go or while I'm doing something. It's very rare that I kind of sit down and listen to a full album, and I think that's quite a lot of people of my generation that do now. So while it might be best to kind of have the initial exposure while people are doing nothing, it may be kind of counterintuitive in the streaming sense. When we were speaking off this before recording, we made a good point about streaming something that you do on the go. No worries. And that kind of made sense a lot. Streaming something that you actually do on the go while actually listening to a record, if you was going to do it on vinyl or just even in a CD player, it's obviously something that you sit down and listen to.
Yeah, I mean, when I was at uni, there was a bit of research that I was looking at that was to do with engagement in social media, which is kind of relevant to this, which was if you just write something, it doesn't get as much interaction as if you put a picture, or if you put a video, or if you put a quiz, or if you put something where people can win something, like, you know, a competition, things like that. And also, I think people's attention span has lessened in recent years because everything's so at the click of a button. You know, so the whole act of listening to music from the 1960s compared to now is, if you explain to people in the 1960s what you could do now, I think they'd literally just be like, whoa, you know. But I think what it's actually done is it's actually harmed music as an art form in quite a massive way. You know, people would get together and there'll be one guy down the road that's got a massive blues collection of vinyl, but you might have like 70s metal, you know, and then someone else has got classical, and you'd sort of go around each other's houses and listen to each other's records, or you'd go and buy a record and you put it on, you'd listen to it whilst looking at the sleeve and the inserts, you know, like taking in the artwork, and you'd really appreciate it. You'd listen to it from start to finish, you'd listen to the progression of the album, and that's how people used to listen to music. I think nowadays getting successful with a track is heavily weighted on the playlists that you can get on Spotify.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of top playlists, and there's people that run that, and you can forward your tracks to get on those playlists. And if you get on that playlist, then your track might get more listens than it would anywhere else, and that's how you can get sort of your leg up in the industry as a you know, somebody that makes music at the moment. But you wouldn't ever put a whole album on that playlist.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't happen. Nobody would sit down, and very few people would listen to that song and then go to the album and listen to the whole album from start to finish. You know, if that's the last song in the album, nobody's going to go to the beginning of the album, or probably even to the middle or a few tracks before. They just listen to that one song. I say nobody, very few people would. I think it's genre dependent as well. I think the kind of contemporary music isn't really an album thing.
Yeah, I think you can see that by the way it's laid out. One thing that I kind of noticed with a lot of older albums is it's not necessarily a story, but it flows a lot more. Like listening to a lot of Marvin Gaye's stuff, that's probably the best example. Like, I know it flows very well, each song after another. and it's like it's all recorded, which it was back then, in like a live session right there then.
Yeah.
And you can see where like each song flows from each other one. Now, like you said, it's each song is released on an album as its kind of own individualistic thing to get onto a playlist, and that song itself may have 5 versions of it to get on a load of different playlists.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Motown was probably the best music ever made.
100%.
And if you listen to a lot of stuff now, it draws a lot of heavy influence from that. Like, if you listen to sort of Uptown Funk and Happy and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, it really draws on that kind of Motown sort of black vibe of people. What you had with Motown was there was a group of musicians that in the day were in the studio, and in the night they were in a jazz club playing. They're called the Funk Brothers.
Right.
And every single Motown artist, that is the backing, that is the band. And there's a fair few of them. There was 2 drummers, I think, 2 bassists, and there was loads of people in the band. And they just lived and breathed music.
Mm.
And then Motown were an interesting label because when they took artists on like Marvin Gaye, they would give them singing lessons and they would really sort of train them.
Wow.
They'd really work with their artists.
That must be quite pioneering for back then as well.
Yeah, I mean, it was a label by black people for black people in a time where in some states there was still segregation, really,
Yeah.
And arguably there still is today. And it was really about the music. It wasn't, labels generally were about squeezing an artist, just squeezing everything out of them.
Essentially a cash cow.
But that, yeah, and the result of that is what other label stands up to Motown. Nothing really stands up to that. It was just absolutely incredible. And this is coming from a dude who listens to Led Zeppelin and Smashing Pumpkins, and I absolutely love rock and grunge and heavy, loud, angry music, 19's, stuff like that. But when I listen to those records, or even like early Michael Jackson, like when you listen to Off the Wall and Bad, those albums just sound absolutely incredible.
So sorry, go on.
No, go on.
Yeah, you are right with that. I think this kind of relating back to the COVID-19 stuff. Obviously, record companies have various ones have worked in different ways. And back then, it was obviously a lot easier for record companies to make money off album sales and vinyl sales. That's recently changed with the introduction of like 360 deals, which obviously rely a lot more on tours. Do you want to try and explain like 360 deals a bit more to people that are listening?
Yeah, briefly. They're it's quite insidious in my opinion. It's the only way that the labels have been able to stay alive. Labels are an interesting concept because really they're an address book and a bank loan. So they have the money to create an album with an artist, and they have the contacts to put it out to get it to where it should be to make money. But in doing so, back in the day, all of the rights would be waived to the label from the artist, and the artist would get a percentage. And the label themselves would be making the most amount of money out of it. And if you're a super massive artist, you could still make a lot of money, but nothing against what the label was actually raking in. 360 deals encompass all that as well as everything else. So they basically own you. They own your merch. They own your tour. So every avenue of income for you as an artist is owned by the label. So you, in a way, you're kind of branding yourself. You're creating like almost like a company that is owned by them. So every image of you, every logo, every song, every stream is owned by them.
And
so that's kind of the way that with. Sorry, go on.
So within that, within that kind of everything that's owned, touring makes the most money for record labels now. That's the main income, isn't it? That's out of all the avenues of money revenue generation that an artist can give through them 360 deals. Touring is the main one. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's obviously it all changed in the 90s and really the late 90s, when you had digital representations that could easily be copied and shared online. So that's pirating. So when you make a record, like very briefly, I'll explain it. The person that writes it has the publishing, and then the person who performs it has the performance rights, and then the person that makes the recording has the mechanical rights. So when a piece of vinyl back in the 60s was sold, whatever those percentages of rights would be, the money that you get from that record being sold would be split amongst those people. And that was the same for a digital representation like a CD or a download. But with streaming, it doesn't work like that, because you're not creating a copy, you're renting. And the infrastructure for splitting the money down amongst all the artists and all the people that own the copyright isn't there.
Right.
So that's why artists aren't getting paid properly by Spotify, in a nutshell.
Right.
Like you can go a lot deeper into how it works. Like, we could do that at a later date, but it's really complicated. But that's why, and obviously streaming is the one thing that kicks the crap out of any technology. The reason why a new piece of technology is better than an old piece of technology is because it's always more convenient.
Yeah.
It's always easier to use and better at whatever purpose it serves. So streaming is the most convenient way of listening to everything. You know, you've got pretty much everything on Spotify. Like, when I first started using Spotify, the Beatles weren't on there.
Yeah,
I don't think Led Zeppelin weren't on there. There was a lot of big artists that weren't. And then I switched over from iTunes to Spotify a couple of years ago, and, you know, everything's on there that I want. So I was using it all the time, and I still do now, because it's just so quick and easy. That's why it's taken over. But the quality suffers because you're streaming against when you download a higher quality format track or listen to an analog representation like vinyl. So there is a trade-off, kind of orally, but that's why the money has dropped from record sales, and that's why people are charging more money to go and play gigs, and why festival tickets are going up and gig tickets are going up.
So, yeah, that's quite interesting. With the point you was talking about earlier, with essentially record companies are just banks providing bank loans. If a band's main kind of pay back to that company is through touring, if these tours are cancelled through festivals and gigs, what happens to them if they can't pay back their bank loan this year because of COVID-19 and everything that's going on?
If I'm honest, I don't know. I haven't got that much insight into the actual workings of the financial side of it. I don't know if it works exactly the way a bank loan would. I'm guessing, because generally the idea was that they lend you the money to... what they do first is they'd give you an advance. So they give you 10 grand or 20 grand, almost as like a retainer. So you take that money, you sign a contract, and that means that you are their artist now. And then they put you in a studio. So really the idea is that money is... They give that to you, so you think that they're just giving you money and you're going to be rich.
Yeah.
It's a clever trick, but that is still part of the loan. Then they loan you the money to make the album. Then you sell the album, and what's supposed to happen is the album sales are supposed to pay back the loan for making the album and make you both money.
Yeah.
That's how it used to work. But because streaming has taken over and the infrastructure for paying artists just isn't up to scratch, the money isn't being recouped. So they have to, like you said, pay that back off of the merch and the tour. So it's like any situation of being in debt, where if you go to whoever your debtor is and say, I can't pay back because of COVID-19, they'll probably say, well, here's a period of which you won't accrue any interest, or we won't expect any payment, because otherwise, what's going to happen? They just cut you off, and then they've lost money, and you don't owe them anything anymore. Do you know what I mean? So there'll probably be like a delay period, the way there is with mortgages and credit cards and things like that, loans, during this period for everyone else. I'm guessing.
Yeah. So, all right, okay, that's quite an interesting point. With the aspect of, let's say, obviously nothing's, take COVID-19 out of it. Let's say, what happens if a band doesn't make enough money to pay back the record company off its first album, off its first tour? What happens after that?
It would roll over to the second album,
and that's just a continuous cycle until they either get dropped or
until either they make money or they get dropped.
So it's kind of like you're just stuck in, if you're an artist and you've got this debt and you don't pay off, you're just essentially stuck in this cycle of selling your music in order to essentially pay back this loan.
I mean, there's some really interesting videos like P Diddy, DJ Jazzy Jeff, when he went to the Grammys, he was given a Grammy.
Mm-hmm.
He went up on stage, smiled, laughed, left the stage, went out to his Jeep and just broke down in tears because he was like, how have I got a Grammy but I've got $100 in the bank and every month I get a invoice sent to me from the record label saying you owe us 30 grand or however much it was. He was like, you don't get paid at the end of the month, you don't get a paycheck, you get an invoice. They want money off you. And the other thing is all of the glam that comes with stardom, the sort of ideas of the big hotels and the parties, cocaine and all of the great food and all of the limos and all that. They're not paying for that. You're paying for that. That's just, they're basically giving you a credit card. And a lot of the time with artists, they don't have the choice. The label will set all of this up because in a way it's like PR. It's like, look at this artist, it's doing so well. You should love this artist and be really into them because look how great their lifestyle is. But that's costing you money. So not only have you got the debt from an album, you've got the debt from the whole lifestyle that they're forcing upon you.
Right.
So can you see what I mean? It's pretty insidious.
It's like they're trying to trap them in, aren't they? And
absolutely, like what are they called? Guns N' Roses. They did an album called The Spaghetti Incident, and they were contractually obligated to do another album with the label. It was the last album with the label. And they just did a covers album because they hated each other. None of them got on. It's called The Spaghetti Incident because I think it was Axl, threw a plate of spaghetti at one of them, and they were in court, and his lawyer said, so should we talk about the spaghetti incident? And they all just started laughing, so that's why they called the album The Spaghetti Incident.
Just if anyone's kind of ever heard like stories about Axl, that's just ridiculous. It doesn't surprise you. Like there's been not even just stories that you hear about in the band members of like people with celebrities who've been around Axl and been around Guns N' Roses have all said like how ridiculous he is.
One of the famous fashion designers, I can't remember who it was, punched him in the face because they got into an argument. And Axl, there was like a quote, and he was saying that he wears these massive rings, and he was like, if I hit him first, security would then rush in and sort of take control of the situation, because he was like, if I get punched, I'll probably lose an eye. So this guy literally just smacked Axl before he could get smacked, and then the security like rushed them and pulled them apart. But he's the only guy that sort of disappeared into the woods and then came back and sort of went, right, I'm back at it now, and just sort of carried on.
Yeah, that is strange. So is there any chance with record companies with losing this kind of revenue through tours at the minute, is there any way for them to kind of diversify their income stream any further, or is that kind of is that it for they've got them kind of set income streams with merch, streaming, the few album sales that do go, tours? Is there any way to diversify their income streams any further to kind of prevent this reliance on tours, or is it quite hard to do that?
I can't really see how you could squeeze anything else out, and I think if you could, they would have done it by now.
Yeah.
I think this is just one of those situations that the only thing that you can do is get insurance against it somehow. Do you know what I mean? And nobody's ever going to think, you know what, I should get insurance against a pandemic.
Yeah.
it just doesn't happen.
Yeah, especially when it happens once every century or a few centuries. Like it's unprecedented times, so it's hard to insure against any of this thing. And I think we're going to probably see not only the music industry but every industry dramatically change when we come out at the end of this. What do you think about kind of some artists have tried to kind of capitalize on this and try to do other avenues to connect to fans and generate income streams? Like we've seen artists trying to do these virtual live shows. I didn't watch all of it, but I saw that Chris Martin out of Coldplay did one. What do you think of this? Is this just kind of like a thing to pass the time and satisfy fans while this is all going on, or do you think there's a potential future for artists doing this?
I think right now it's valid with the situation that we're in with COVID-19. I think moving forward, given the technology that we have, it's not really a viable option at the moment. Because the whole point of going to a gig really is the kind of, as well as seeing the band, the kind of social aspect of being around people.
Yeah, the atmosphere.
I think you need to kind of get that. So at the moment, the only way that you can do that is probably VR. But not many people have VR. It's not really the most ideal system. It costs a bit of money to get into. The headsets are like over £200, aren't they? You need a good gaming computer. So you're looking at, upwards of sort of like £600-700 probably.
Yeah.
I was watching a video of Gabe Newell from Valve talking about the new. It was an interview. He was talking about the new Half-Life game that they've just brought out, and he was talking. The guy, the interviewer, said to him, "What do you think about the sort of future of AI? Do you have the sort of Elon Musk view of it?" And he was like trying to explain it or fathom it now. It's like saying to people in the 60s about the internet nowadays. It's unfathomable, and when it happens, it will make sense. It will be clear, but in my mind, it's kind of like that. There's some sort of interface that will come out in the next sort of 10 years where we'll be able to almost plug in like the Matrix. That's my vision of what's going to happen, probably 10 to 20 years. And I think once that happens, when things are more immersive than VR, because VR is still pretty immersive, it's cool, but it's not really as immersive as real life, is it? I think when that happens, that could completely negate the need for venues and for tours, especially with our carbon footprint being such an issue.
Yeah. And,
that's been a rising issue of the last sort of 20, 30 years. I mean, it's gone on to the 60s, but nowadays people are way more aware of it. I saw the 1975 with my girlfriend a few months ago, and he put on a video of Greta Thunberg talking about, we have to take action, we need to rebel against the governments and all this sort of crap, while he's on a tour with probably about 20 Arctics out the back for all of his lighting and PA. So you can't put a video of Greta Thunberg up when you've got that big a CO2 footprint for your tour. Do you know what I mean? Plus all the electricity it takes, because he has a big lighting rig, like a 9 Inch Nails sized lighting rig.
I think it's Coldplay, isn't it? Like the music industry as a whole, like all industries, kind of need to reduce their kind of greenhouse gas emissions and this. But I think it was Coldplay who suspended their future touring, and so they could actually find a way of reducing these greenhouse gas emissions. So I don't know whether they were aiming for carbon neutral or whether it was just significantly reduced by a certain percentage, but that seems like a way that maybe the music industry might be taking a look at in the way forward.
The first way to go, which is the way I think gigs should be, is go smaller. Going to a stadium, like I went to the Olympic Stadium and I saw Rolling Stones, and I saw Foo Fighters about a month afterwards there. I think it was like 2 years ago now. That's a huge stadium full of tens of thousands of people, and a huge rig to fill that space. A huge amount of lighting, just for one evening for a 2-hour show. if it's kind of, if venues are smaller, more intimate, that's better from an audience perspective, in my opinion. But I think going to big shows is just utter shite. It never sounds good because those venues, it's a stadium. It's not a music venue. Do you know what I mean? So acoustically, it always sounds like absolute crap. And then it's not very intimate. You wind up looking at a screen, not looking at a band.
Yeah.
And you've got the Golden Circle, which is just the biggest load of crap as well. You know, oh, I'm rich and I'm an old fart, so I can go at the front, and all you young kids that actually really like this band, can't afford to see them this close, can stand back there. You know, I think it's, the whole ethos of it is just, obviously, yeah, it's a business, you need to make money, but I just think it's gone too far the other way. If it became smaller, more personal, if rigs were in-house, you don't have to take Arctics full of gear. If it was just one Arctic per band on tour, then your carbon footprint is minuscule compared to what it was. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that does make sense.
That's one way that you could do it. The other thing is more electric vehicles are becoming what's the word? They're kind of the technology is getting better. Battery technology is starting to catch up because it's never been pushed because all of the petroleum companies needed to make money. And they bought out all of the rights for cars that were using like water to, fuel themselves, hydrogen on demand systems, stuff like that. But a battery technology has been stunted, so these petroleum companies could continue to make money. So that's why we are so behind, and that's why we're now facing this sort of crisis, because they've just squeezed it to the point where it's like, no, we actually really need to make a change now. So when that starts catching up, when you've got electric trucks that aren't pumping out CO2 gases, that makes the whole situation a lot better. So you can still go to tours. The other side of this is tying back into COVID-19. Perhaps there are going to be restrictions on either movement or the capacities of gatherings and things like that.
Yeah.
Which, in a way, if you've got 10,000 people, you're still going to spread something a lot quicker than 300, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think what will be interesting when we kind of come towards it, we're coming out of this and people are trying to go back to gigs again, is the security and the methods of being checked when we're going to, like, not only just gigs but any kind of collection of quite a lot of people. I remember after the Manchester bombings for the arena, afterwards checks kind of increased exponentially and more intensely. It was going into, I think I went to the Manchester arena I think about 6 months after that, and there was like essentially scanners like what you'd go through an airport. So it'd be interesting to see what we're going to face when we're going to go into gigs just at the start.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't streamlined testing. And I don't think it will ever be streamlined to the point where they can test people on the way into a gig. I'm hoping that people's general cleanliness is better.
Some big hopes.
And that goes... Yeah, well... this is just sort of proven don't be a dirty bastard. All of these things that you taught as a kid, coughs and sneezes spread diseases. It's... You're not taught that for no reason.
Yeah.
As a child, and then it's like people get into adulthood and just sort of, who cares? I'll sneeze in my hands and then touch that metal railing. So I'm hoping that people's cleanliness is generally a bit better and situations like this might be somewhat avoided. But also I feel like a lot of this is out of the population's hand. It's more in the hands of the government. And I think that they should have been quicker to act. I think had they caught it sooner and dealt with it sooner, better, then this whole situation would have been not quite as mental as it has been, potentially.
Within obviously governments have a major part to play in this, and every industry does. How do you think streaming companies, so your Spotify's, your iTunes, how do you think, are they taking on enough responsibility? Like, I recently read something that Spotify will be giving grants up to £1,000 available to those who have been have been an artist for at least 2 years and earned over more than £500 in the past 2 years on the Spotify. I know Apple have released something similar, but I don't know the full details of it. Is that enough, or do they have to take on more responsibility for the way that they provide an income for artists?
I mean, the whole situation of Spotify not appropriately paying artists is enough to sort of go off and say that they're not doing enough, full stop. I think £1,000 for making £500. Is it £500 in the last 2 years?
Yeah.
If you figure out the way it works is it splits the amount of streams by the amount of income that they've had from the previous month minus some sort of performance rights. I've double checked that, but your amount of streams against the billions of streams against everyone else means that you'll net very little money. Making £500 in the last 2 years on Spotify without being an artist that's actually got some serious traction, which there's not much middle ground. It's either you'll go on there and you'll just float a little bit, or you're going to be in the sky and you've made it as an artist. There's very little middle ground. So the likelihood of you making that much money in the last 2 years is very slim. And even if you have £1,000, yeah, every little helps, but £1,000 isn't really that much, is it?
It's not much.
Sure, I mean,
it's not a lot to the likes of the Drakes, the Rihannas, the Ed Sheerans. You wouldn't expect them to take it. Hopefully they wouldn't.
Fuck them, because they've made loads of money anyway. If artists are acting responsibly, they'd say, "Don't give me that £1,000. I've already got loads of money because I'm Drake or Rihanna. Give it to the guys at the bottom that haven't made £500."
And this is the thing as well.
Trying to sort of
this is another aspect as well, is that what's £1,000 is, if you give, let's say it's one artist who's a singer songwriter or whatever, that if they give them £1,000, okay, it'll help them get through a month probably, but not a lot of that is people at the bottom are generally bands because of the way that music shift forward now. So if you're splitting £1,000 between a band of four, 250 quid's not a lot.
250 quid's bugger all. Yeah, no, it's something. They're doing something at least, but like I say, Spotify aren't and haven't. Like I say, the infrastructure, getting the infrastructure in place to actually pay artists appropriately is enormously complicated. But given the fact that there's already a model in place for copyright, for the actual copying of a song or an album by an artist and the royalties being paid, surely they can go off the back of that to sort of figure it out, if you see what I mean. So it's Spotify and streaming it's a really kind of it's a really complicated part of the industry, but it is the reason why the industry is struggling so much,
Yeah.
So really, I think they should do more. But what can they do?
Yeah. It's easy to do something more than to actually back it up. And not everyone wants to take their responsibility. How do you see overall? It's a very hard question, this, because none of us can look into the future and we don't know what's going to happen. But how do you see the music industry evolving after all this? Is there anything that you could kind of get a gist of what you think is going to happen, or?
I need to think more deeply about this in general, because I'm getting more involved in it, and
this is your livelihood as well.
Say again.
This is your livelihood as well. This is you're supposed to spend all summer making. Probably this summer was supposed to be your peak season of income generation, and
across.
Yeah. With festivals
across
and
the
gigs.
year. It's because really there's two sides to it. There's the recording or the sort of musical side, if that doesn't make sense. The kind of recording and analog and digital representations of recordings. There's that side of it, and then there's the live side of it. But they have an impact on each other. So obviously gigs are going up in price because the record side is suffering, and this was due to ignorance. A lot of artists said, that this could be a problem, streaming could be a problem, and record labels and all the execs just sort of ignored it because over the 80s they were making so much money off of records. It was unbelievable. Like, it was unreal the amount of money that was being made. And I think they got so lost in this sort of paradise that they were in at that point, they didn't expect it to just go so quickly.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, it's got to work for everyone because it's business and it's flow of money. And it's always been the artist that has suffered the most. And like I say, with labels having 360 deals, that you can either do that if you've got the opportunity, if a label have given you the opportunity to sign a deal and waive all your rights to your creation to them so that they can put it out and try and net an amount of money that you'll get a percentage of. There's that way of going, but then there's the other way that people have been going, which is like, no, I'm absolutely not giving you the copyright of my art. You can get lost, and then trying to go through the social media routes. But as soon as somebody makes it using one way, like
it's like YouTubers essentially.
You know, the guy that died. Say again.
Is it? Sorry, yeah, no, say that again.
Was it Nipsey Hussle, the guy that died recently, or I think it was like last year or the year before? He created a mixtape which he sold for $100,
right? And
he got rich off of it. People bought it, and I haven't listened to it, so I can't comment on what it's actually like. But people bought it for $100, and he made loads of money. And obviously, if somebody else then tries to do that, they're going, "Oh, well, you're just trying to be like him." See what I mean? So sometimes these avenues open up. It seems like there needs to be some level of middle ground. So you've got independent labels that are trying to be this middle ground where it's kind of like, we're independent, we haven't got loads of money, we can't put you up in hotels constantly and, do all of the lavish things and make you pay for it anyway. But we also can't necessarily put you up with the best of the artists, producers and mix engineers and mastering engineers straight away. So what happens is they use less expensive studios and things like that, which in effect I think is better. I think it's a better way of doing it, but they just don't have the marketing power that the big labels have. So getting it onto FIFA or getting it into adverts or on games and TV shows and stuff, they just don't have that pull. That's the trouble. So it's politics. It's internal politics. It's the relations between the people in all of these jobs, not necessarily opening up the kind of the flow of cash to this middle ground because they want it all for themselves. So it's greed, just like So it's a really complex situation. And then on top of that, on the recording side, because you have streaming and the amount of money that's coming in is far less than what it used to be, trying to figure out a way of making that balance out again without putting people off listening to music, which wouldn't happen anyway because what else are they going to do? So, music's always going to be something that people want to engage with.
Yeah.
Because you could put the price of Spotify up and somehow create the infrastructure so it pays everybody accordingly and brings in the amount of money that it should bring in. And then what will happen is gigs will go down in price. Right? So all of it is just tipping the scales. Yeah,
and I think if you're doing that, you're bringing that group element back to music. When we were speaking about earlier, how music's kind of become a bit more individualistic as we don't go and listen to music with our friends and people. We don't listen to it as much with people anymore. That could be a solution, to be fair. One thing that's
the resurgence of vinyl has helped.
Yes,
but that's something that is complicated and people don't realise. You get all of the hipsters that are like, I buy vinyl, and then they buy the 1975 in vinyl, and it's like, well, that's just been recorded into Pro Tools. So that's a digital recording that you're listening to. It's not like it's been recorded to tape and then laid to vinyl, in which case it's purely analog. So you're not actually really benefiting from having it on vinyl. apart from having a medium that should last longer than anything else.
Right.
See what I mean?
Yeah, no, I get that, because you do see a lot of kind of vinyls knocking about now of recent, they had a revival. I think it was in the mid-90s, wasn't it? They had a big revival.
Yeah.
And I still don't think they're performing that well. I think I heard a stat coming out of, like, Beethoven sold more on the actual previous old records than Beyonce or something, which, if you're looking at it from like a complete initial thing, who doesn't really know a lot about music, they probably, why is that happening? But obviously it's the demographic of people that listen to that.
Yeah.
And like you said, I think in our generation you've kind of got a lot of these kind of young kind of hipster people that want it to say, oh, it sounds so much better, which it does, but if you're doing it to listen to the 1975, it might still sound better, but it negates of what the actual whole thing stands for, like what you're trying to explain here, compared to if you was going to listen to it with the likes of Led Zeppelin or the Marvin Gaye or the Beatles, where it was made for vinyl.
Yeah, I mean, so then you can start getting into the argument of quality, where I could go properly into this, but I'll try and keep it really surface. When I went to uni, and just in general, people have talked about the fact that streaming is much lower quality, or probably the least quality service you can use to listen to music, or platform, I should say, medium. So I did a couple of tests where I got some songs that I knew really well on Spotify and bought them on iTunes. So they're AAC downloads, so they're a higher quality format. I think AAC is higher quality than CD as well, which is MP3. So basically they're different codecs where when a song's mastered digitally, it's brought into a codec where it's cut down in size. And the way that each codec works is slightly different, so the quality differs. So MP3 is basically, I think, the lowest. I think FLAC is the highest. AAC somewhere in the middle. Off the top of my head, this is rough. So I went from Spotify and listened on iTunes. iTunes was immediately louder, which can trick you. So I turned the volume of iTunes down. So it was just interesting knowing that they were louder to begin with. But I turned the volume of them down and then kept switching back and forth. And there was a lot more detail in the bass, and there was a lot more it was really open in the high end. Like you could hear a lot of the kind of details of the vocal and reverbs and snares and things like that that you couldn't hear in Spotify. So the difference in quality to me was night and day. I mean, I've got good ears because this is what I do, but I noticed it right away. But I showed it to my friend who's builder, and he even noticed it straight away in my car. Like my speakers in my car are terrible, but he was like, Jesus Christ, yeah, you can notice that straight away. Then I got Tidal compared to Spotify. Couldn't really hear a difference, but I need to go in on that a bit more. But it was just kind of like, now when I listen to stuff on iTunes, I'm like, God, this sounds so much better. And then it started making me think about when I used to listen to vinyl a lot more, because I have a lot of vinyl. I have a deck, but I don't have it set up at the moment. When we move, I'm borrowing a hi-fi off my boss that he's got spare. I'm going to start getting really into vinyl again. But I went to a friend's recently, and he's got a cheap deck with some cheap speakers and a cheap amp. And we were listening to vinyl, and I was like, God, it just feels so much more dynamic. Like, it's got more punch. Like, you can close your eyes, and it feels like it really encompasses you. I don't know how deep that sounds. But I was like, there really is a massive difference in the quality. And some people just don't care. And, fair enough. They just want to listen to their usual playlist of music, or the top 50 or something, and go about their day. And that's absolutely fine. But I think for people that actually sort of really appreciate music and really want to understand everything that goes into it, I just think a lot of that is lost with Spotify. I think a lot of that ethos, like we were talking about, the way that you listen to music is lost. I just think that's a bit of a shame.
Yeah.
And if it's such a fast food thing, such a throwaway thing as well, where Spotify is throwaway, you can listen to something and just forget about it and it doesn't matter, but you have to physically throw away a CD or vinyl.
I think, yeah.
Or give it to someone or sell it.
I think,
and you'll remember it because you threw it away, or you sold it, or you gave it to someone.
I think the initial thing as well, I think it sums up, I know we're doing a bit of research about the streaming industry, is the fact that I think it doesn't classify as a stream for the artist if the listener stops listening to it in the first, I think it's the first 10 seconds or the first 30 seconds. And it's so easy just to swipe across and not do that. Now, compared to if you're going to put a CD on, you probably have a bit more hesitation and effort to take it back out and think, I don't want to listen to this anymore.
Yeah, because you've got to get it out the CD player and put something else in.
You've got to get up, get back out, and then, and
Yeah.
So, it's this, and that aspect, because it's mass, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. While I do really enjoy listening to music, and I do love having Spotify because I can have everything in one. I think it's expanded my aspects of being able to listen to different genres. The way that you're kind of talking about it seems like it's kind of the equivalent of, a fast food chain compared to a restaurant, where it's there for the masses. It'll do its job. It'll be liked by a lot of people. However, people who are more probably into food will probably love a specific restaurant a lot more and won't probably stay far away from fast food chains. So that aspect of being a connoisseur in a certain industry, and appreciating the in-depth value of what is of a product or a service or a tune or a song, which it is quite fascinating. I think the only aspect I can relate to you within noticing that difference is when you can kind of, whenever you have a normal pair of headphones, and then if you make that leap from, to buying a really good pair of headphones and you put it on and you're like, wow, I can hear a lot more on this. And then if you ever go back to some normal ones, you're like, what? I can't go back to this. I'm missing so much, and you can tell the difference of what you're listening to. So I can understand hearing that difference in quality.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I just got some new headphones, some open back ones. Because you've got closed back, so people can't hear what you're listening to, so you're not bugging other people. And you've got open back, which you use in mixing, because acoustically they're better, and they basically engulf your ear. They go all the way around your ear, not on your ear. So your ears are sort of left in their normal sort of state, and just, I've been doing a bit of gaming while I've been locked down, and I use those now, and it's just like it's such a more, what's the word, immersive experience. And I just feel like a lot of people lose this when they listen on their Apple Buds, which, to be fair, people slate Apple Buds, and I don't think they're that terrible. I think they're actually okay. Just like Spotify is okay. It's not great, but it's not terrible. You can get far worse earbuds or in-ear headphones. But when I get this hi-fi, I know that when I put that first bit of vinyl down, which I'm not sure, it'll probably be like Morrison Hotel by the Doors or something like that, and I put it on, I know that me and my girlfriend are just going to go, wow. And it's just like, that's that idea of wow is what I want to get into people's minds. And some people, you just can't tide over with stuff like that. Some people just don't care. And that's absolutely fine. Like I say, you can just go about your day, listen to the top 50, fair enough. But I just think it's such the amount of effort that goes into making an album. All the little nuances, all the mistakes that were made, that were not necessarily mistakes, but all the unintentional things that happen that create stuff, that adds interest, and you think, wow, that's really cool. Like the sort of bits of bleed in Led Zeppelin 1 where you can hear Robert Plant shouting in the background, but it isn't meant to be there. But because nowadays you can edit stuff like that out easily, back then you couldn't. It's like, that's what adds to the character. Everything's so clinical now. Listening to your earbuds is completely different to listening on a hi-fi, because that hi-fi will colour the sound. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that.
I just feel like all of that is just completely lost.
Yeah. Well, this has been fantastic, Rich. It's been good to hear about a bit more about how this might impact the COVID-19 impact the music industry, and also just to learn a bit more about the music industry in general. Thank you for that, and thank you for coming on.
No worries, man. Thank you.
No worries. Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, feel free to subscribe and share, and give the show a 5-star rating on all the podcast apps. Thank you.